Once upon a time, there lived a woman who had an only son named Jack. She was very poor, for Jack's father had left to seek his fortune but never returned. Jack was young and has not learned a trade. Instead, he was always laying about, daydreaming. Almost all they had been stole to buy bread, until at last there was nothing left to sell. Only their cow, Milky White, remained. But one sad day, Milky White gave no milk. "Alas, we have only the cow to sell," said the poor woman. "Don't worry, mother," said Jack. "I will take her to market." The market was in town and was quite a ways away. "Are you sure?" Not wanting to make the trek herself. "Trust me," then added, "How much should I?" "5 pieces of gold, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But ask more if you can get it," she said. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? "I'll do it," said Jack. "You'll see, mother, you'll see." "Mother, please don't worry." So the woman agreed, and Jack set off to market with the cow. After a while, they came upon a strange old man sitting on a stump by the roadside. Jack had never seen this man before, but he nodded and smiled. "Good day, young man." "Hello," Jack said. "Where are you going with that cow?" the man asked. "To market, sir, to sell her." "Fine-looking beast," said the man. "What price are you asking?" 5 pieces of gold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 pieces? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? A handsome price, but perhaps not so much for such a fine beast. Does she give sweet milk? She has given us milky for many years," Jack said, proud of his answer, for every word was true. "I see," said the old man. 5 pieces of gold seem hardly enough for this fine animal. Jack began to get excited. Would he pay the full price, or even more? "It's lucky we met," said the man. "You may save yourself the trouble of going so far. Come closer. Let me show you something. Something far more precious than gold." With this, he put his hand in his pocket and pulled out 5 brightly colored beans. They were so beautiful they seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. "Beans," said Jack, though they were the most beautiful he'd ever seen. "Yes, beans, but the most wonderful beans that were ever known." Then he leaned in and whispered, "They're magic." "Magic beans? What do they do?" "They will lead you to beauty and riches beyond your dreams." Well, all this was too much for Jack to resist. So he put out his hand and shouted, "Sold! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Jack took the beans and handed the man the rope tied to Milky White. Then he patted the cow on the head and without another word turned and ran for home. I needn't tell you his mother's reaction when Jack returned home without a single piece of gold, but only 5 small beans in exchange for their last possession. And not even good to eat, she cried, having tried to. And she spat the one out the window. And then threw the rest out as well. To bed with you. Jack, feeling sad, confused, and quite foolish, went to bed without supper, for there was nothing left to eat. As night fell and darkness filled Jack's room, his empty stomach grumbled. He thought about the old man and felt angry, but more angry at himself for trusting the stranger. Finally, Jack fell sadly but soundly asleep, unaware of the wonder that was occurring just outside his window. When Jack woke up the next morning, his room was almost dark. At first, he thought it must still be night, but hearing a rooster crow, Jack jumped out of bed and ran to the window. The sun was shining, but from the ground outside his window, there was a great beanstalk, as thick as a tree, stretching up and up as far as he could see into the sky. I wonder where it leads, thought Jack, and with that he jumped out of the window and he began to climb. Jack climbed up and up, till after a while his mother's cottage looked like a mere speck below, and he marveled at the dancing clouds about him that swirled around like waves on a great river. Finally, the stalk ended, and Jack found himself above a great thick cloud in a new and beautiful country. "I wonder where I am," said Jack, and he began to explore. It was a beautiful place with hills and trees and grass, all seeming to grow out of a bed of billowy clouds. Yet there were no clouds overhead, as this land was above them all. A little way off, there was a house, a little cottage with a picket fence. As Jack walked toward it, he found the little house to be farther off than he'd thought. And not a little house at all. It was the size of a castle. Now, to this point, Jack had lived a simple life, so Jack had no experience to tell him that walking up to a giant house in a strange land might not be wise. But all that was about to change. As Jack approached the front door, he wondered how anyone could open such a huge thing. But no sooner than he thought it, the door burst open. With no time to run out of the way, Jack dropped flat on the ground just in time for the great door to swing over the top of him. Then a huge boot crashed down beside him. Jack nearly cried out, but looking up, Jack found himself frozen with fear. For towering above him was a woman as tall as a tree, carrying a huge basket of laundry. As Jack stared in wonder, the woman hung the clothes on a clothesline that was so high, Jack hadn't even seen it. Then she turned back toward the house and was about to step on Jack when he cried, "Look out!" "What's that?" she said, as she bent way down to peer at a quivering Jack. And before he could move, she scooped up Jack in one hand. "Well, what have we here? Where'd you come from?" But before Jack could answer, he heard a great roar from inside the house. "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Shh," said the woman, "not a sound." And with that, she slipped Jack into her apron pocket. "What are you going on about?" the woman said. The giant voice came near. "I said, I smell." "Yeah, you do. You need a bath. Go down to the lake and take one. And while you're at it, take along that magic goose of yours. She needs fresh air if she's to keep laying." Jack could hear the deep voice grumbling as he went off. After a moment, the giant woman gently took Jack from her pocket. "You're safe, for now," she said. Who was that?" "My husband," she said. "Lucky for you, I came along first." "Did you say magic goose?" Jack asked. "You never mind about that." "Where'd you come from?" she asked. But the last few moments had Jack pondering his answer. "I'm not really sure," he said, not wanting to expose his mother to danger if these giants were to discover the beanstalk. "Well, no matter," said the woman. "You should run along now. You're a cute little thing, and I wouldn't want anything to happen to you. I need to fix our supper now." Supper? Said Jack, longingly. Having had nothing to eat in at least a day. Have you a little extra? Oh my, she said, you are a skinny little thing. You must be starving. So she took Jack into the house. She sat Jack on the edge of a huge table and brought out bread and meat and cakes. She chopped great piles of vegetables and sausages. She boiled soup and made stew in pots as big as Jack himself. She put so much food in front of him, he couldn't possibly eat it all. But he tried. Oh, he tried. And all the while she told Jack tales of this land of the giants in the sky, and stories of her husband that were both funny and terrifying. After a while, Jack was stuffed and sleepy from all the excitement of the day. But just then, fee, fi, fo, fum! The woman swept Jack up. Don't make a sound. And she slipped Jack into a big jar in the cupboard. The giant entered. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. What was that, dear? I said, I smell dinner. Yeah, you do. Now sit down. The giant surveyed the table. It was strewn with crumbs and morsels of uneaten food. What's this? He asked. You were gone so long at your bath that I started without you. Now come and eat. The jar Jack was in was made of a smoky glass. As long as he remained quiet, he knew he'd be unnoticed, but he was able to see out and watch. The giant put the goose on the table. I wonder what makes it magic, he thought. Just then, the giant looked sternly at the goose. Lay, he rumbled, and the goose sat down. Lay, and it wiggled its tail. Lay, it let out a little quack and stood up again, and where it had sat was a shiny egg of gold. The giant chuckled. The goose looked frightened. Wife, demanded the giant, bring me my bags of gold. So the giant woman reached into a cabinet next to where Jack hid. Then she pulled out 2 bags as big as Jack himself and placed them on the table. Poor little thing, she said as she gently scooped up the goose. If you keep making it lay those golden eggs every day, you'll wear the poor thing out. And she placed the goose in a small cage on a shelf below Jack. If it stops laying, I'll have it for a snack, he roared, as he poured out a pile of gold chips, like eggshells, onto the table. The goose gave out a little quack, and Jack was more frightened than ever. After a while, the giant put the gold pieces back into the bags and put the egg in as well. Then he reached up onto a high shelf and brought down a little harp and placed it on the table. It, too, was made of solid gold. "Sing!" And then the harp began to play and sing the most beautiful but sad music Jack had ever heard. Before long, the lovely music was replaced by thunderous snores. The giant's wife took down the jar where she'd hidden Jack and quietly crept to the door. "Shh," she whispered. He was a light sleeper. For a moment, they both froze when they heard, "Fee! Fie! Foo! Thumb!" And the snoring continued. "Now you run along to wherever you came from while you can," she said. Then looking back, she continued, "Oh dear, he'll have to wait till morning to clean up or else I'll wake him." Then she looked at Jack. "And he's quite mean when he's been wakened." With that, the giant woman crept back into the house and slowly, quietly shut the great door behind her. "What a wonderful adventure," thought Jack as he made his way to the Beanstalk. "I can't wait to get home and tell Mother." First magic beans, then a magic goose that lays golden eggs, now a magic harp that plays and sings without being touched. His mother would never believe it. Mother. Oh my, he thought, she must be so worried about me. She'll probably be angry with me for leaving without telling her. He thought about his mother and how sad she was. He thought about how poor and how hungry they become, and how he'd sold their last possession, the cow, for the beans that weren't even good to eat. But they did lead him up to... And suddenly, Jack had an idea. He took a deep breath and began to run back to the house of the giants. As he reached the door, he could still hear the giant snoring. He thought, how shall I get in? Then he remembered when he fell to the ground, the door had swung right over him. And with that, he lay down and crawled onto the door. Once inside, he remembered the woman saying, "He's a light sleeper." So even though Jack wondered how the giant could possibly hear anything over his own snoring, he tiptoed around the wall to the cupboard. Once there, he climbed up and gently opened the door to the goose's cage. "Come with me, pretty goose. I'll make sure nobody ever eats you." So the frightened goose let Jack pick her up, and the two climbed back down to the floor. "Wait here," whispered Jack. Then he went back and climbed up the leg of a chair and pulled himself onto the table. As he quietly approached the golden harp, Jack noticed the bags of gold. They were almost as big as he was. "I couldn't carry even one," he thought. But again, Jack thought about his poor mother and how often she'd gone hungry so that he might have something to eat. Then Jack felt within himself a strength he'd never known. He picked up one of the bags, picked up the golden harp, and made his way to the floor. There was the goose, patiently waiting, so he carefully scooped her up and started for the door, when suddenly Jack tripped, and the goose, and the harp all hit the floor with a thud. And with a terrible snort, the giant sat up. "Fee, fi, fo, fum!" And he turned to see Jack laying on the floor. Now Jack's fear made him even stronger. He ran for the door, dropping to its stomach and sliding head first, pulling the treasures with him. Once outside, Jack ran as he'd never run before, straight to the beanstalk. He climbed and slid and climbed some more, feeling he'd never reached the bottom. Then Jack felt a mighty jerk. Looking up, he saw the giant chartered to climb down after him. Then the cracking of the stalk gave Jack an idea. He cried out, "Mother, mother, get the axe!" Jack's mother heard the commotion. She ran for the axe and returned just as Jack jumped to the ground. Chop, 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 crackle, crack, went the beanstalk until finally... Crash! The beanstalk fell, and with it the great giant, striking the ground so hard he made a huge crater, so deep he disappeared into it. A weary Jack presented his mother with the treasures of his adventure. The harp, the goose, and the gold. They were now quite wealthy and never again went hungry. The goose laid her eggs for them, the harp played and sang for them, and the gold built them a warm and happy home. Every so often, near the huge crater, you can still hear echoing deep inside. Fee, fi, fo, fum.